How about that? Are you receiving that?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Hello, hello. I'm Margaret Lowe-Smith. I'm president of Atlantic Live. That's the events division of the Atlantic magazine, and we produce events across the country and even occasionally around the world on some of the most consequential issues of our time. And I gather, I'm especially happy to be here in San Antonio, I gather it's on the hot list for Lonely Planet of the best places to visit in this country. And so it's a real treat to be here to learn what makes this city stand out as we talk about early childhood education and the San Antonio experience. So welcome to this Next America Forum. I'm glad to see such a wonderful crowd here this morning. I think everybody in this room knows that across the country there's been a new wave of support for early childhood education and the role it plays in preparing kids for academic success. Yet we also know that there's little agreement on what works best. So today we're going to talk about the San Antonio Voter-Supported Initiative funding a full day of pre-K for 4-year-olds, mainly from low-income families. Pre-K for SA is now in its 3rd year and is providing bilingual education to nearly 1,800 San Antonio kids. It's a small start, but you have captured the attention of the nation, which is one of the reasons that we're here. And this morning, we're going to learn about the program, its impact, lessons learned. We'll hear from parents, teachers, lawmakers, community leaders who saw the chance to bring opportunity to this city's youngest residents. And a few notes before we get started. We are on Twitter, of course, at Atlantic_Live. You can join the conversation using the hashtag NextAmerica. That's NextAmerica. And we'll be taking questions after most sessions. So I want everybody to be part of this conversation, so don't be shy. And before we get rolling in earnest, I want to thank the Heising Simons Foundation, whose support made this morning possible. Thank you so much. To kick us off, please welcome Congressman Joaquin Castro, his twin brother, Julian Castro, the former mayor, current HUD secretary, and the architect of Pre-K for SA. Unfortunately, couldn't be here in person as he'd hoped, but he is joining us by phone. And my colleague, Atlantic senior editor Ron Brownstein, is here to lead the conversation. Take it away, Ron.
You know, in the event business, there's a term of art for an announcement that comes through the sound system, not from the podium. It's called the voice of God. And this morning, in the role of the voice of God, we have your former mayor, Julian Castro, who I think is with us here. Can you hear me, Mayor?
I can. It's great to be with y'all.
Welcome.
Thanks for letting me be a part of this, and let me just start by apologizing to all of the good folks in my hometown that I'm not able to be there in person. I definitely, with the weather and missing home, I would definitely prefer to be there.
Well, thank you for joining us. Let me start by asking you, often when we do events about education and opportunity, I will ask panelists kind of the hypothetical question. If you had $1 to spend and your goal was to reduce some of the opportunity gaps that we now see in society, where would you choose to spend it? You actually went through this process not as a theoretical exercise, but as an actual exercise in San Antonio, because your pre-K program grew out of not a process of deciding where to start an early childhood program, but from exactly that kind of calculation. Where could you make the biggest difference? Where could you have the largest point of leverage by investing your dollars? Talk a little bit about that process and why you settled on pre-K as the answer.
Yeah, you're right. We didn't start off by saying, absolutely, we're going to invest the last 1/8 of a cent sales tax that we had available at that time in early childhood education. Pre-K for SA really started out of an effort called the Brainpower Task Force that was a combination of business leaders and education leaders who were charged with looking at if we were to take that last 1/8 of a cent sales tax capacity that San Antonio had left, how could we best use it to move the needle on education? And at the beginning of the process, we looked at everything from whether there was a way that we could invest to prevent folks from dropping out or get dropouts back into the school system, to what we could do during those middle school years that are often this tenuous path for young people where they can go in the right direction or the wrong direction. But ultimately, after going through the research, inviting experts in to make their presentations, what we found was, and what other cities have found, is that the evidence is very compelling that if you have that dollar to spend, it's best spent on children when they're young, when their minds are developing at their fastest, when you can make the biggest difference in setting them on a strong trajectory educationally. And so that's how we came to understand that we should put that resource into early childhood education.
Now, as I understand it, when you, at the time you passed the effort, most kids in the city were enrolled in some kind of pre-K. Some districts had part day, some districts had full day. What were you specifically hoping to add with this program to what already existed at the time you implemented it?
Two things. First of all, we identified a gap of 5,700 young people every year who would be eligible for pre-K but were not getting full-day pre-K. You're right, there are 15 independent school districts that operate within the bounds of San Antonio, and some of them have full-day, some of them only have half-day, and so we wanted to provide full-day pre-K, and secondly, we wanted to make it the best quality in the state of Texas. And so it was really these two things, filling that gap and making sure that the quality of it was better than anything else out there. And that's what drove us to put together the Pre-K for SA proposal.
And Leon, I guess Leon, this is Joaquin, you remember that there was some debate after SA 2020 and this plan to do something about education in San Antonio. Even when you guys got together, there was a debate about whether to spend it on pre-K or higher ed. In fact, I advocated for spending some of that money on higher ed. My brother didn't listen to me, obviously, wisely. But it wasn't clear that that was the only thing or the main thing that we were going to do. I think it turns out to have been a great decision, but there was a lot of debate about how to use that money.
I know you've been obviously working on other things the last couple years, but I'm wondering what your thoughts. I mean, you've now been up and running since 2013 here. What do you think are the major lessons that you've learned, most important things you've learned in these first years of operation?
It's a great question, and of course, Kathy and Brock and Elaine Mendoza and others can probably speak more granularly to the schools and within the classroom. But I would just say, the big picture, number one, that it took a lot of working with the existing system, because Pre-K for SA is really built on what public schools in San Antonio are already offering. It's taking that half day and then putting on another half day on top of it. So these are students that technically are still on the rolls of whatever school district they would have come from. One of the biggest lessons I learned was just how important it was to go and do the outreach to these school districts and get those school districts on board. The second thing that stuck in my mind as it ramped up was the importance of the outreach to parents, because we had a whole bunch of parents who were eligible, or their children were eligible, this opportunity was in front of them, but it wasn't like, we had all of the seats filled up right away. In fact, in that first year, we actually didn't quite hit the mark in terms of enrollment. We were almost there, and it was a Herculean effort to get there, and overall it was great, but technically we didn't get there. We did after that, but that was a reminder that all of the outreach work to the community in getting parents to be aware of the program was so important. After that first year, I think more and more that took care of itself, because parents had a great experience with their kids in the program, and the word of mouth spread in those neighborhoods, and now what you see is that they're over capacity, they're oversubscribed. So I'd say that outreach worked, and the program has a great reputation, and that's helping it drive attendance.
Congressman, I'm going to ask you your thoughts on the lessons in a minute, but I want to ask your brother two more questions before we lose him. And this is a question from sort of your national perch. I mean, we have seen a number of cities now in the last few years go down this road of trying to expand access to pre-K on their own. Denver, Seattle, New York City, Chicago. How far do you think cities can advance this cause by themselves, and how much do they need intervention and support from larger entities, either states or the federal government?
Yeah, cities can do a lot, and San Antonio is a good example. New York is a fantastic example more recently of that. Cities can do a lot. However, at the end of the day, this is fundamentally still a responsibility and a challenge that's going to have to be met by the state government, because that's where the lion's share of funding is coming from. So we were very fortunate that we had that 1/8 of a cent sales tax left. Most big cities in Texas don't have that available anymore, and so the revenue stream is not there under Texas law. In other parts of the country, they found creative ways to fund pre-K, but the number of students in those seats compared to the overall number of children being funded by the state is still relatively small. And so in pre-K for SA, there's a lesson in that, because we built it on the system that was already in place by the state by adding on to that half day that the state is already funding. I think that's an important model for other communities to look at, if they're cities to look at if they're considering investing in early childhood education. Take advantage of the resources that are already being invested, and then improve the quality from there with your own efforts.
Can I ask you I want to ask you two more questions of kind of a national perspective, and then we will let you get back to your day. One thing that is a fact of life for Hispanic and African American kids in almost every major city. In a study we just published last week in Next America, the Next America Project, which is sponsoring this event, we found that in 85 of the 100 largest cities in America, a majority of African American and a majority of Hispanic kids attend schools where most of their classmates qualify as poor or low income. In fact, 78% of Latino kids and 73% of African American kids in San Antonio, for example, attend majority low income schools. The numbers are even worse in several of the other Texas cities. Is it possible, do you think, to equalize educational opportunity without tackling that level of economic and often racial segregation in the schools?
Oh, you absolutely have to. Number one, states have to make the investment that they ought to be making, starting with even the 0 to 3 age range, and then in pre-K and beyond that. And so, number one, there has to be a more robust and smarter investment in getting folks into an early and good start in their educational journey. But you also have to look at neighborhoods and where these kids are, and how you can holistically lift up the quality of life and economic opportunity in those neighborhoods for their parents too. That's why one of the things I'm most proud of the Obama administration, and San Antonio is a good example with a promise zone and a promise neighborhood and choice neighborhood effort there, is this effort to break through the silos. So connect education to housing, to transportation, to the environment that folks live in. If we can do that on a local basis and a state basis, I think that we can start more effectively addressing economic segregation and racial segregation, and lift up the prospects for a lot of these kids.
And housing? What about housing? And housing
Absolutely,
segregation?
yeah. And the choice neighborhood effort and promise zones include and are driven by that effort to improve the housing stock in an area, and to ensure that we have great housing opportunity throughout the city.
Let me ask you one final question, and then we'll let you go and ask your brother to weigh in on the congressman on the same question. You know, as I said, the Next America Project, which is a sponsor of this event today, we try to look at how changing demography is changing the national agenda, and in that respect, in many ways, Texas is America on fast forward. We've just crossed the threshold nationally, where a majority of the public school students nationwide are kids of color. In Texas, it's over 70%. We expect, the demographers expect a majority of the under 18 population nationwide to be kids of color sometime later this decade. In Texas, again, it's already about 2/3. The projections from Steve Murdoch, the former head of the Census Bureau under President Bush, now at Rice University, is that all of the net growth in the Texas workforce over the next 3.5 decades will be diverse workers. Latinos alone will provide 3/4 of the total net new workers in the state. When you look at the way the state is responding to these changes, both in the public sector leadership and the private sector leadership, how would you assess the degree of awareness, magnitude, and urgency of the response to this level of demographic change that the state will be experiencing in the years to come?
Yeah, it's safe to say that it varies, and Steve Murdoch has just done a fantastic job of laying out the case, you know, that the writing is on the wall, that we have a choice. Either we can make the right investments and ensure that you have a generation of young people that are well educated and have the skills to compete in this 21st century global economy, and you can prosper if you do that, or you might be able to do well in the short term, but if you don't equip that generation with those skills and that knowledge, they're not going to be able to compete, and the state is not going to be able to compete in the 21st century global economy. And so Texas, I think in the short term, is doing a lot of things that folks think, well, they're getting jobs into the state using incentives and tax incentives and abatements and so forth, getting some quick hit. But my concern is that the state is not laying a stronger long-term foundation to be competitive in the 21st century global economy where, you know, as I said a million times when I was mayor, where brain power is the currency of success. That's why a program like Pre-K for SA and what other communities are doing in other cities is so important to raise the top of young people who are prepared and can compete, are going to drive your economy forward.
All right, Mr. Castro, thank you very much for joining us. We'll let you go now, but luckily we have another Castro right here. So let me.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. Same question for you. The demographic transition in Texas is not really, it's like debating the weather. I mean, it is. It just is it is a fact. It is more accelerated, more profound here than even in most places, although it's certainly happening to a lesser extent around the country. 300 of the 500 largest school districts in America are now majority kids of color. Right. When you look at the way the state is responding, what would you add to what your brother said?
I think it leaves a lot to be desired. I think if you look at Texas over the last several years, there was a lot of talk about the Texas miracle, for example. And it's true that Texas, compared to a lot of other states, or actually any other state, for many years created more jobs than any state in the nation, which is something I think all Texans are proud of. But if you look at what was going on, and to extent what's still going on, is we were creating jobs, but we were also importing from other states millions and millions of people, oftentimes the folks who were taking those jobs. So what we had is a situation where we're not training Texans with a strong education system and a strong higher ed system to actually qualify for a lot of the jobs that we're bringing in. So there's a little bit of a disjuncture there, a bit of a shell game, quite honestly. And I think that our politicians and our leaders need to get in the middle of that and build a stronger educational foundation so that it's Texans that are creating and getting the new jobs.
So let's talk a little bit. You've looked at the question of access to pre-K from a national level.
Right.
And one of the statistics from the National Center for Educational Statistics is that about 2/3 of 4-year-olds, about 40% of 3-year-olds are in some kind of pre-K program. But they report those numbers have actually not increased since 2000. Why are we stuck, and what is the answer?
Well, I think one of the big reasons we're stuck is because because of the way pre-K dollars are distributed. A lot of that money goes, in fact, most of that money comes from the federal government and goes to the states. So you're dependent upon a governor or state legislature to say, we're going to accept that money with the strings attached, right? Whether they like them or not. We're going to accept that money and we're going to dole it out to the school districts. So part of the legislation that I filed, Pre-K for USA rather than Pre-K for SA, is to essentially allow cities and counties and school districts to circumvent the state and draw on money directly from the federal government. It's not just a problem in education. In Texas, for example, a few years back, Governor Perry rejected a bunch of unemployment money when we were still going through the recession. There's not been an expansion of Medicaid. So everybody in these local areas is subject to what the governor decides to do, and I think we ought to change that.
But that's an interesting point, because I mean, going back to the 90s, the Bill Clinton administration, Democrats, and even really going back to Medicaid in the 60s, Democrats have often preferred this model of providing federal dollars and allowing states to join in as a way of expanding a program they think is a social good. The S-CHIP program in the 90s, the Medicaid program in the 60s. Certainly that is the model that President Obama has proposed on expanding access to pre-K, and Hillary Clinton, who you support, has proposed on expanding access to pre-K. In the post-Medicaid world, where the significant majority of Republican-led states chose not to expand under the ACA, do you think that model is now obsolete?
I think, if not obsolete, I just think there's a better one. There is a more local model that we should pursue. Because you're right, you get into states like Texas where there's a huge need with health care, and a governor who says, I'm just not going to expand it, well, nobody gets that money. So there are people who literally are ailing with, diseases like cancer and others who are not going to get coverage because the governor has decided he's not going to take that money. The same thing with education.
Why even though depend on the mayor? I mean, if your view is that children anywhere, I assume, would benefit from access to pre-K.
Right.
So why not make, if the federal government is going to do this, why not make it something like Title I, where in essence there's no intermediary?
Yeah, no, and I think school districts, for example, should be able to bid to the federal government.
Okay.
And if you look at other parts of federal resources, like HUD with my brother, a lot of that money doesn't go through the state, it goes through local housing authorities.
Yeah, right.
So that footprint, that model is already in place in other departments.
What's the case, have you been convinced that there is in fact an airtight case that expanded access to pre-K ultimately produces better educational and life outcomes?
Oh, sure. I mean, if the question is, does going through pre-K better prepare a student than not going through it, I don't think there's any debate about that.
Because there are still, the study out of Tennessee, for example, that question whether the gains can be sustained if,
Sure.
As you go into the education system.
Oh, no, and I think that speaks to the fact that you've got to have a strong education system, pre-K through college, basically, right? But the studies have shown that it gives students a strong start. Mm-hmm. That has to be sustained as they go on.
This project here has built in a lot of evaluation right from the beginning.
Right.
So talk a little bit about, in your mind, what will be the determination in your mind of whether this is in fact a success?
I think ultimately, well, let me first say that this is one piece, right? I mean, there's an education pipeline. Each of those pieces, all of that infrastructure has to be successful. I spent a lot of time in the Texas legislature and even now in Congress on higher education issues and getting more students who graduate from high school to go on to college and complete. So ultimately the goal is for San Antonio to bring up a generation of students who graduate from college or go into the workforce and are successful. But we figured out that we couldn't make that happen, or it was going to be a lot harder to make that happen unless we did something about the pre-K piece. And I'm glad that we did.
Now, one of the things in writing about these issues over the years, the question, and it was kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier when we were talking about the concentrations of poverties in the school. How much can you lean on the education system to overcome a whole series of factors? Is it realistic to expect schools themselves, even starting earlier with pre-K, to reverse all of the other challenges facing low-income communities?
The schools aren't a panacea for all of the social challenges that we face. You have a lot of kids who come from households of deep poverty, for example, where I grew up in the West Side. I often use the example in higher ed of students applying to college. We have a system there where a lot of students don't have parents that went to college themselves, so they get hardly any college advising. And then we've created a system in schools, an anachronistic counseling system, college advising system, so they don't really get it there. But I do think that the schools doing everything that they can to supplement or to improve upon what's going on at home, I think can be very helpful. And then you have nonprofits like Avance, who are trying to do the work of parenting and improving parenting skills.
And that's one of the interesting things about the San Antonio initiative is that there's a big parent component.
Right.
A big
it
outreach.
Engages the parent. And
Talk
you
a
see
little bit
that,
about that. Yeah.
Well, I think that we found that, and this is not new, but that the more you engage parents, the more successful those kids are likely to be, especially in the early years. And what I found over the years, just in my role as basically a legislator in San Antonio, is that I would go visit schools. I'd go to elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, all of them. And if you went to a PTA meeting at an elementary school, you'd see a lot of parents. And then the middle school would have less parents. And by high school, there's about 3 people who are holding up the banner, right? Because folks have spread out. Now, admittedly, in high school, there's other things going on, the band club and the athletic clubs and all that parents can support. But you do see a lot more participation early on. We want to make sure that sticks around as we get into the later grades.
Now, turn back to your legislation for a couple questions. This debate has been stuck from day one. The president proposed it. As I said, Secretary Clinton proposed it in her campaign, but there's been very little interest among the Republicans in Congress, even though a number of red states like Oklahoma and Georgia have undertaken their own initiatives to expand access to pre-K. You've been there a while. Is there any way to kind of reconfigure this debate and kind of reshape it that it will allow this discussion to get out of the frozen state that it's in now?
Well, you know, when the Congress passed ESSA in December, there is money for pre-K there, which is good. I mean, the bill itself gave generally more flexibility to the states. That was one of the conditions of a Republican majority Congress to pass that major overhaul. But I think that what we have to do is depoliticize it as much as possible. It shouldn't be seen as a Republican or a Democratic issue. To the extent that we can do that, or even a small government or big government issue, if you get caught in those different political axes, it's going to be tough sometimes to implement a program in a red state, for example.
So here's one thing I've wondered about a way of potentially changing the dynamic. When S-CHIP was created in '97, a program to expand access to health care.
And Texas was one of the last states to take that up, too.
But when S-CHIP was created, it was created as part of a budget package that reduced projected spending on Medicare. It was, in effect, part of a generational rebalancing of the budget. It wasn't really raising the '97 budget deal did not raise new taxes, but it expanded a program for young people by saying, well, the federal government now spends $7 per capita on seniors for every dollar it spends on kids, which is the number, roughly. So one thing I've wondered is whether there might be more, whether it would change the parameters or the polarity of the debate at all if Democrats are willing to say that maybe the way to fund an expanded investment in the next generation, who ultimately are going to support Medicare and Social Security through their productivity, would be to constrain some of the spending on entitlement programs, as opposed to raising new taxes to fund for it.
I hope AARP's not here.
No, I'm right. But is that like completely, like, is that, I mean, because you are kind of right at a brick wall here, with Republicans really not even contemplating this idea, and the prospects of them not controlling the House in the near future are probably pretty small. So is there any way to rethink about how to frame this debate in a way that might broaden the audience for expanded pre-K?
No, I mean, there certainly is. And I think all things should be on the table and at least looked at, right? But we've got to be committed to this work, because this is what creates a strong foundation later on for all of these kids that are growing up, especially as our country is becoming more diverse. And so we've got to find a way to
that is one of the most striking things about the current access to pre-K. Again, using the National Center for Educational Statistics data. If you look at it, 75% of kids from parents with a postgraduate degree are in pre-K. 70% of those from parents with a four-year degree are in pre-K. Only 59% of those with a high school degree or less are in pre-K. So to some extent, as you see in the education system, which is supposed to be our escalator of upward mobility, kind of sanding down class differences, in many ways it functions to reinforce them.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's true. We saw this in San Antonio, where a lot of the areas that are served by pre-K for SA, a lot of those parents, their kids were not going to pre-K programs. And so there is this incredible need. And, I see Patty Riddle here from the San Antonio Independent School District Board, who represents the West Side, where I grew up, and she knows the incredible need in that area. Cheryl Scully, the city manager, is here, who helped with my brother shepherd that pre-K for SA program. And so, you asked about lessons to my brother, and I think one of the lessons for me is that the pre-K for SA program represents a city in one area saying that we were not going to wait for Washington and Austin to act. Now, it turns out after that, in the last legislative session, Austin did commit more money for pre-K education. And I think they owe us a thank you, because San Antonio spearheaded that initiative. I mean, that really was our work. Getting it done, putting it into the state conversation, and I think on some level the national conversation. I know Oklahoma and New York and others have also done it, but making this not just about one city, but really a movement to change education.
Yeah. Well, let's. I want to save a couple questions for the end, but let's bring in the audience for a few minutes for questions. There's a microphone, I think, around. Yes, there's a microphone. So if you have questions, please. We have one right up here. Lindsay is heading your way.
Hi, my name is Allison Brim. I work with the Texas Organizing Project, and I was hoping you would talk a little bit about, coming back to the San Antonio pre-K for SA, what you think the keys are to making sure that it continues to have success and build on itself, perhaps expand to 3-year-olds. I know it'll be going back to the voters in 2020, maybe.
Right.
So what do we need to be doing now to make sure that that success continues here locally?
Well, all indications are that the pre-K centers are a success so far. So that's great news. Every time I've come across a parent Sometimes I'll be at HEB or somewhere else and somebody will come up to me and say, oh, my daughter or my son is in pre-K for SA. They come up to me because they think I'm my brother. And so they want to say thank you. I always correct them. But they're very pleased with the program. In fact, a few weeks ago, somebody said that they moved their child from a private school into the pre-K for SA program. So I think the quality of instruction and the operation has to remain great. Hopefully the city, and I believe it will remain committed to the pre-K for SA program. And then finally, remember, this only came about with the partnership of the school districts. The school districts have to remain committed to the program, and I believe that they will also. And another thank you from us to the business community is that folks forget, we were able to transcend ideological and political lines here. You had Joe Robles from USAA, of course, the huge insurance and real estate and financial company, and also Charles Butt, who owns HEB, grocery stores, as the two gentlemen who came together with a full committee to come up with this plan.
And what you mentioned the business community was invested in the development and the passage of the plan. What's been their engagement since it's gone into effect?
It's been great. Folks are on the board, making sure that it still succeeds. And as long as they continue to do that and everybody plays their role, I think it will be around for decades to come.
Yeah. Let's see. Other questions? There's one in the back.
My name is Adam Gates. I work for RVK Architects here in San Antonio. And my question's about curriculum. I guess for me, I'm seeing this difference between early childhood education in the form of pre-K and just daycare.
Right.
So, what we're talking about has some sort of intent. It has some sort of a curriculum involved, like I said. So what are the goals in teaching young children at this age, and what does that curriculum want to look like? What are we trying to create in people at that young age?
You're right. You get into this concern about, well, let me just put it this way. When this was on the ballot, and remember, it was on the ballot in November of 2012, and we specifically put it on the ballot in November of 2012 because we knew that was our best chance of passing it. Ordinarily, a lot of the city initiatives have been put on the May ballot, where you have a smaller electorate that tends to be more conservative in their outlook. So we knew if we put it up in May, it wasn't going to pass. So it passed with 53% in November. But one of the knocks against it during the debate was that this was going to be glorified daycare, that parents were going to support it just because they wanted to dump their kids off somewhere. Well, if you look at the curriculum and the operation, it's clear that that's just not true. This is about doing everything that we can to get these young kids and students to learn, to be prepared to go into kindergarten and first grade, elementary, and so forth. And so we're very proud of that, that it's actually engaging students in setting them up for the subject matters that they're going to deal with later on. And of course, at that age, you have a lot of folks who are, the kids that are working on interpersonal skills, relating to others. I think about my own daughter who's almost 2.5, and for a long time she was an only child. So whenever she'd get around other kids, she would freak out. Right? Mm-hmm. There's a socialization element to it also that they're working on.
Other questions? Over here.
Good morning. I'm Gabrielle Lemonnier. I'm the treasurer for the Texas Alliance of Black School Educators. And earlier it was mentioned that many times minority students face schools that are filled with students of poverty. We also know that what comes with that is not always the most highly qualified teachers. So what did you all do to combat that, to ensure that in those schools you were able to ensure that the students were receiving instruction from teachers who were best prepared?
Well, that's a great question. My dad was a teacher for 31 years, 26 of them in the Edgewood School District. I started school in Edgewood. And I had a lot of great teachers who inspired me. Unfortunately, I also had some that weren't so great over the years. But what we asked of the folks at Pre-K for SA is to go and recruit the very best folks they could find, and to make sure that the salary was also commensurate and competitive so that we could recruit the very best. And I've been somebody in the state who's advocated for paying our teachers better, for treating it like the job, treating it like the place it holds in our society, and the importance it holds in our society. Well, we gave Pre-K for SA the leverage to do that.
Can I ask a follow-up question, actually from the question before going to the next audience question? The sales tax increase that you put in, was that the most you could do legally?
It was.
Okay.
We had remaining a 1/8 cent sales tax left. A few years back, there was a proposal to use that 1/8 cent for a crime control district that failed, I think around 2006, 2007. Now, part of the reason that other cities have not taken this up is that they've already maxed out their sales tax. So they would have to figure out another way to go and
I was
finance.
going to say, so even if you decide this is this is a success, and you have clear evidence that it's working, would you have the capacity to expand it either to more eligible 4-year-olds or to 3-year-olds when it comes up in 2020? Would you have any funding mechanism by which you could do that, or are you basically capped out at what you're doing now?
Well, I suspect, I know Cheryl could probably answer this better, but I suspect the city would have to commit money from another source, general revenue, for example. It could theoretically do that, but this is a dedicated revenue source.
And you're at the max.
And we're at the max.
You're at the
yeah.
max on the dedicated revenue
Right.
source. And so ultimately, in all likelihood, I think you're saying, if you are going to expand it either to a broader pool of 4-year-olds, much less to 3-year-olds, you're probably going to need someone, the state, federal government to...
Yeah. No, and that was our intention. Our intention was obviously to supplement the educational experience in San Antonio, but quite honestly, we wanted to make this a movement. We wanted to start a larger conversation in Texas and throughout the nation on the importance of pre-kindergarten education. And I think to a large extent, we've been successful in that.
Have you talked to mayors, have you or your brother been consulted by mayors from the other cities
Yeah.
that are now
I know
moving
my
down
brother
this track?
has. Yeah, in Congress, I, along with Congresswoman Clark of Massachusetts, and 2 Republicans have founded the Pre-K Caucus, which we're going to be kicking off soon. That will have membership of Republican and Democrat to support pre-kindergarten education as we go forward in Congress.
Maybe they'll be more successful at counting the ballots than the Iowa caucus, but
Yeah.
let's see, over here. Sorry, I'd make you run right there. I think this will be our last question.
Hi, I'm June Halisack from Family Educators Alliance of South Texas. My question is, where do you stand when you have peer-reviewed studies that show that children that have been through pre-K programs at the beginning of their elementary education are above their peers, but by the time they get to 3rd or 4th grade, they're equal with their peers academically?
I mean, I think that we need to be paying attention to what's going on in kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. I don't think that's an argument not to do everything that you can in those early years. That's an argument for improvement of the early years of elementary school.
Final question. We have a little time left. Let me ask you, if Democrat is elected president in 2016, you are supporting one of them, I believe. What would you counsel, and clearly this is a priority for Hillary Clinton and Bernie
Right.
Sanders, both
Sure.
have ambitious programs. What would you counsel them as a way to break the logjam that we have seen and to move this forward as a national priority?
To localize it, to move away from just running the money through the states, to follow the model at HUD and other departments where school districts or cities or counties, a more local governmental entity can bid for this money so that we don't get caught up as we have with Medicaid expansion where you have Bexar County that wants to accept the money or Travis or other counties and they can't because the governor refuses to. And I think it works the reverse way. If you have a Republican president, there's going to be monies that they want to put forth that more conservative counties or cities are going to want to accept, but I think it works for them also.
Congressman, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Ron.
Margaret? I think we'll go this way.
Thank you so much, Congressman Castro. Thank you, Ron. Next, we're going to talk about actually measuring the success of pre-K at the local, at the state, and at the national level. We have a well-rounded group for this conversation. First, please welcome San Antonio Councilman Ray Lopez. We also have Richard Perez, President and CEO of the San Antonio Chamber of Commerce. Libby Doggett is Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy and Early Learning at the Department of Education, and it's probably worth noting that Libby began her career not far from here in Austin, teaching bilingual first grade. And last but certainly not least, State Representative Dan Huberty, who is on the Public Education Committee in the Texas House, and here to lead the conversation is my colleague, Atlantic Editor Emily Dury. Over to you, Emily.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
Medicaid
Thank you all for
experiences like
joining
that
us.
that
I
are
appreciate
great.
it.
It's
Representative
seminal.
Schubert, let's start with
No one thought
When
even
you were
95% of the
proposing
money.
preschool legislation, what are some of the markers of success that you were looking for?
Yeah, yeah.
Sure. Well, first I wanted to pass it. I mean, that was kind of like the important thing.
Yeah.
You know, pre-K education
All right, so I'm
in
gonna
the
see you
state
at
of
the airport.
Texas
Yeah,
has
see-
been
see
around a
you-
long time. And what was interesting is that there's a lot of garbage noise around what was happening with pre-K at a federal level, which I'm sure that we will talk about, and what the ideas of the current administration has on that. But it got a little confusing with people because they thought, oh, here we go, we're going to put universal pre-K in the state of Texas. Oh, this is horrible, and unfortunately, in the state of Texas, a lot of people don't read the bills, including many of my colleagues, and they didn't understand what was in the bill. So the reality is that pre-K already existed in Texas. A half a K pre-K would already exist for about 50% of the population. And we're spending, oh, by the way, about $800 million a year on it. And when the governor came to me, we had some ideas on pre-K, but when the governor came to me and said, look, we want to work on this, and I want a high-quality pre-K program, and keeping in mind, this was the #1 emergency item for him. So it was the #1 priority for him as
Right.
pre-K education. And so we wanted to look at it and say, you know, what has to go into the mixing bowl to make sure that it goes well. And you know, we look at it and say, you know, making sure that we get some results. And we're not talking about standardized tests or anything like that. We're talking about making sure that they're following the TEKS, making sure that we got good quality teachers in the program, because in some cases they don't have the qualified teachers in there. And regardless of what people say, you know, the teaching of those kids, you have to have qualified teachers in there. So we wanted to make sure that we had that associated with that. Measuring it, you know, some of the things that got into the bill, and we could talk about it later, some other things that got in there. But really just kind of looking at the results. Where are we spending the $800 million on? Is it daycare, or is it actually, are they learning something? And we wanted to make sure that they were learning something. So that was kind of the starting point.
Right. And Dr. Doggett, I'd love to go to you next. When we're looking at the national level, there's been a push to expand pre-K. Not all of these programs look the same, and I don't think that the government is saying they all need to look the same, but what are some of the critical components for making sure that kids are learning?
Great. Well, first I want to thank you, Emily, and thank the Atlantic and Heising-Simons for doing this, and my colleagues in San Antonio who've done an amazing job with Pre-K for SA, and Kathy Bruck, who's led the effort. She's done an incredible job. We're trying to back you up at the national level. We think it's important for the federal government to work with state governments, to work with local governments, to make sure that every environment that children are in, whether it's home, it's a child care center, or it's a pre-K center, and in beginning at birth is a learning center. I think for so long we've said, this is child care, this is Head Start, this is preschool, and we haven't realized that for children it doesn't make any difference. They all need stimulating, exciting, hands-on, active learning environments from birth on. And so at the federal level, the president has come out very strong for preschool for every 4-year-old, not just those at risk, because every 4-year-old needs to go to preschool. We want to work with states to build that, because you're right, there's not one size fits all. But we also know that kids get to preschool behind. And we need to do more for infants and toddlers and for 3-year-olds. And so we've done that through increasing funds for Head Start. There's a new Head Start Child Care Partnership, which is increasing the quality for infant care. But we need to do a lot more because we're only getting started.
Right. And Mr. Perez, for many of the cities and states looking at expanding pre-K, buy-in from businesses has been critical, but it hasn't always been easy to secure. And I would love to hear you talk about that a little bit and how you're kind of selling this to businesses.
Sure. Well, thank you, Emily. I will tell you, indeed, it was a hard sell, but I think that our former mayor, Julian Castro, was very smart in assembling a group of business leaders, community leaders, individuals that he assembled and said, we have 1/8% sales tax left. We want to maximize its use. What is the best and highest use of that dollar to enhance the opportunity for this community long term? And after months of very serious analysis, visiting other communities around the country, bringing in experts, the panel landed on high quality, full day pre-K as the best opportunity for a city like San Antonio to take our citizens to the next level. And again, it was a hard sell. We had to then be convinced as a business community, as a Chamber of Commerce, that this made sense. But after we peeled the onion back, it was pretty clear that the evidence was very clear that having a, again, high quality, full day pre-K program made sense. And skip forward now to today, and I'm on the board actually of Pre-K for SA, kind of as a watchdog, if you will, from the business community. And I'm even more convinced now that the work that we're doing as a board and the quality of education that these young ones are getting is the best and is going to be, I think, long-term excellent for the community.
Councilman, you've been backing Pre-K for SA, but do we have a sense really yet of how the program is going?
Well, indeed, the program is going as expected. In some quadrants, it's exceeding expectation. But I think the one that is of best interest to all of us, I think we can all recognize that we've got to select the right children, and that's pretty well predetermined, right? I mean, the kids that are at risk and the like. We also have to make sure that we have the best teachers, and we have hired master teachers and folks that are being, caring and have the ability to deliver what we want. The key really to the success of this program is really on the parents, the parent engagement. I think that's what's going to give us the sense of success and continued success, because it's not only for the one child that we have in our classroom for that year, it's the children in that family that come behind them that we have now taken that parent and made them an engaged parent. That's going to be the measurement of success. We're going to measure success by virtue of test scores, performance in classrooms and things of that nature. But as a society, what we have to do is measure what the level of engagement is from our parents, because that's going to be, quite honestly, all of us that are in education or in government or in municipal or state, federal government can only do so much. It has to happen at the family unit. It has to happen with that level. So I think it's that third leg of the stool, and that's the parent involvement and engagement. Continued engagement is going to be the measurement for success.
It seems like that is a critical component of this Pre-K for SA, that there are some wraparound services being provided at these centers where parents are involved. They may come for healthcare. They're encouraged to volunteer. So it does seem like it's a priority here in San Antonio. But Dr. Doggett, I'd love to go back to you for a moment. Dale Farron out of Vanderbilt has done some research where she doesn't necessarily suggest that preschool is a bad investment, but she suggests that we don't necessarily know it's a good investment, especially for poor children. And I'd love to get your response on that.
Well, I hope everybody looks at that study, because I think it is a wake-up call for all of us. It shouldn't be ignored. It really needs to be used as a call for action. What happened in Tennessee is they didn't tend the program well enough. They didn't have a feel for what direction. They didn't make sure that there was continuous quality improvement. They didn't have families engaged as we have in San Antonio. And so they didn't put in place the quality, the continuous quality improvement that was needed. And I think that was a problem. We do know that preschool works, but there are a lot of buts. But it only works if it's high quality, and you've got to have continuous quality improvement. You've got to fund it better. You've got to have the high quality teachers that we've talked about. In Texas, we have a problem because we have a pre-K to 6th grade certificate. So someone who wants to teach, thank you. So someone who wants to teach 6th grade is very different from pre-K. And in pre-K, we want kids doing active learning. And so if we have a certificate that's P through 6, it puts a whole lot of pressure on the school district to go and get the pre-K teachers the training that they need, instead of asking universities and the state to change the system. And let's make sure that our teachers are coming out of their university, 4 years of a university, or even getting a master's, with the skills they need to walk right into a preschool classroom. So they didn't have the quality improvement that they needed in place. The other thing we need to talk about is you've got to have good kindergarten, first and second, third grade. And we've ignored those, really kindergarten, first and second grade, because those kids weren't tested in those grades. And we put the quality teachers up in third and fourth grade where kids are getting tested. We're sending a better product to the kindergarten. The kindergarten is repeating what they've done before because they were getting kids that hadn't been to pre-K. So we've got to change the kindergarten and first and second grade curriculum and make sure that they're strong. And I don't mean worksheets. I mean, I can see I have a lot of people who know developmentally appropriate practice. We don't mean worksheets. We mean hands-on, active, deep learning, because we know kids are able to do that, and we want to see pre-K, but we want to see better programs up the line, and then we talked a little bit about we want to do more for the infants and toddlers.
Right. And Representative Huberty, is that something the state is looking at, facilitating more continuity between pre-K and K-12?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about what we did last session, excuse me, you know, we weren't even requiring the TEKS to be taught for pre-K. I mean, it wasn't even a requirement. So in order to get the additional funding, we said, look, you gotta abide by the TEKS. So we didn't even know if school districts were doing that, number one. And again, we were putting $800 million into this program, not knowing any type of results, not even knowing the class size. You know, we did a bunch of data collection things to gather some data and some information so that we could actually go, oh, this is working or it's not working. I mean, here's the facts. I've sat on, you know, I was on a school board for 6 years. I've been on the public education committee for the last 6 years. I've heard it all. I've listened to it all. I understand most of it, right? Here's the reality of the situation. The earlier that we're able to capture a child and start letting them learn in a controlled environment, that is going to then push them forward into kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, the better it's going to be. I mean, that's just a fact. I mean, you know, I've listened to people, and we had the debate on the floor that, you know, pre-K is a waste of time and everything else, and statistics don't show that. It's just a fact that the earlier we're able to do that, and if we can align to the TEKS and we can get them into the school and get them into the environment. And again, yeah, I mean, I understand that there's the push for everybody to have it, but, you know, if we think about what we can focus on, what we have the resources to spend on today, we're going to either spend the money today or we're going to spend it in the future. I mean, that's just for the remediation and everything else that goes with it. So, you know, the fact that we're able to get them aligned, the fact that we're able to get them into the right environment to make sure that their learning makes the most sense. The other thing that we did that was interesting this last session is that we also partnered with the private providers, and we said to the private providers, look, you can qualify for fast growth school districts. I represent a lot of fast growth school districts in the suburban Houston area. And one of the things that we looked at is said, you know, even if we wanted to get more kids in the classrooms, we can't. There's not enough room. There's just not enough room and capacity to be able to deal with these kids. You know, there's just, we can't keep up with the growth. And so we said to the private providers, the Primrose, Kids Are Kids, et cetera, hey, by the way, if you guys go and get trained and get your teachers certified and start teaching the TEKS and learning this stuff, it's going to not only help you because you can get paid for that, but also helps our school district, because our superintendents, the smart ones, are saying it doesn't matter where that kid goes to pre-K, they're all going to be his kids, right? I mean, 97% of them. So the ones that go to charter schools or homeschool or, you know, private institutions, the rest of them are going to be pre-K or K through 12 kids. And so we have a responsibility, superintendents have a responsibility, school boards and the state legislature has a responsibility to make sure that the material that we're learning is aligned with the K through 12 education at the earliest possible age.
I do want to talk about that tension, though, because there is a bit of tension between the districts and between pre-K for SA. And Councilman, I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit. And I know that the centers, they pull some funding from the districts, and there's been some criticism from the districts over that.
Well, the funding that we've allocated is certainly not a tremendous amount of money when it comes down to the amount of need, and we've all identified that. When you talk about the number of children that have been served, there's not enough money to go around, so we've got to find additional funding sources. I think part of the anxiety for the school districts, and much like was said earlier, I've spent a lot of time in the public school system on the school board. Had a chance to be president of one of the school districts here in San Antonio, the largest school district in the area, and always had issues relative to funding and who was competing for those funds. And from that perspective, I could see that there is anxiety when other people are in line to perhaps get dollars that might have been directed in your, towards you. So there's a lot of anxiety there. But I believe what's happening now is because with this program, we did a very conscientious outreach to the ISDs and told them, this is a partnership between the city of San Antonio and the independent school districts. Not the charters, not to say that we don't want to partner with them. Not the private schools, not to say we don't want to partner with them, but this is specifically a partnership between you and us. Without you, we will not succeed. We had to be very clear with that, and I don't know that that message was immediately appreciated or believed. Well, like, sure, you're telling us that, but it's just a way of you taking away money from us. I think at the end of the day, what they're finding is that the performance that we're able to achieve is becoming a benefit into the K and beyond public school system. I think they believe that we indeed are a partner with the school districts, with the independent school districts. And I would be remiss if I didn't recognize Kathy Bruck is in the audience somewhere. I can see her, but I know I saw her earlier. The fantastic job that she has done to communicate that partnership with the ISDs. I know that she came from Harlandale, my alma mater, Harlandale ISD, with that kind of a background. And it had to be that level of relationship, say, trust me, I'm one of you, and I am here telling you what this is. I think the other person that needs a lot of recognition is Cheryl Scully. When we laid this on her desk, and when former Mayor Castro said, we're going to head down this path, it was one of those, oh my God, is the city prepared to be able to bring in the subject matter expertise to execute this? And quite honestly, no city has it on their staff, right? We just are not ISDs. So what we had to do was lay the charge on her to go out and do the recruitment. We did, and we were able to partner, and I think the ISDs have believed that. I think there's still some skepticism on that they feel that we've kind of gotten in front of a funding line that is diminishing and difficult to get. But I believe, after now being at it for several years, that they believe that we have a partner. And I hope that that anxiety of us taking their dollars has been alleviated.
I'm also hearing some nervousness from the districts about losing good teachers to pre-K for SA. The salaries are higher, and I know that that's a concern for.
Well, I mean, and that's true, and the answer is, back to the formulas that are set at the state and the federal level about how we pay the teachers, how we go do all the formula distribution of dollars. We aren't necessarily tied to that, but I think that this model underscores the fact that if we pay a professional salary, we will have professional performance. We now are not paying professional salaries and getting professional performance. Can you imagine if we did it? If we did both facets of that. So I believe undoubtedly that we've got a model that works. There are probably some improvements that could be made to that model. There are notions, for example, the concept of looping, perhaps taking some of the children, some of the teachers that are in the pre-K that have had the experience and then moving them into the school districts. Logistics are a little tough on that, but being able to have them move with their children and not have that discontinuity of when I've got them in pre-K, then I get them into kinder, somebody else, another very competent individual is going to go in there and hopefully take that lesson plan and implement it correctly with that child. If we had some methodology of keeping those teachers with those and we were able to figure out the logistics of it, that may be helpful. But those solutions are not going to happen by virtue of the city sitting there thinking through it. It's going to have to be that partnership with the school districts to figure out how we're going to make improvements to the program. And indeed, at the end of the day, when we, the city, get them back after they get out of their 12 or 14 or 16 years of education, that we have a place to put them here in San Antonio within our workforce that's meaningful, that gives them an opportunity not to be arguing and fighting for and looking for minimum wage jobs, but indeed have a quality of life wage that they indeed can have one job, be able to perhaps give back to their family and not have to be off running a second or third job, but be able to go out and participate in schools, participate in the PTA, do the kinds of things that good parenting tactics are. That's a long-term play. We're certainly hopeful that we're going to be successful. And at the end of the day, I don't know that we'll know the real answer. I think we'll feel good about where we are for an awful long time, but we really won't know the true answer until these folks actually, these young kids actually hit the workforce and they're able to be productive and move our nation forward.
Sure. And Dr. Doggett, did you want to add something?
One is, I want to thank you for what you all did in the Texas Senate and the House, and because it was a really good step. We finally got preschool and early childhood back on the agenda, but I want you to know it's only the first step. We have a long way to go. Same thing with San Antonio. I think what's happened here is just, it's been incredible. It's so exciting to go around the country and be able to brag about San Antonio, but it's only a first step. We know there's money for 3-year-olds that can be pulled down. It's sitting there at the state and you can pull it down. We know that most children are out there in child care centers, and so the representative had a really good point that we need to use a diverse delivery system that's in place, because lots of kids are out there, and if we can improve a setting in a child care center by adding more money for 3s and 4s, then we will improve it for the infants and toddlers as well, because you'll have certified teachers there, you'll have training, we'll start building the system that we really don't have. We don't have a system right now. We have a conglomeration that we're trying to piece together, and there's no wonder that there's tension in the system, because we're all fighting for money and the whole system is underfunded.
Right. And do you think that 1 year is enough? I mean, we're talking a 1-year program right now, and is that enough?
No, there's no silver bullets in this, and 1 year is very, very important. And we fought really hard for it because we thought that was a place to start. But it's just a starting point, and we need to do 3s, and we need to do infants and toddlers. And then we've talked a lot about family engagement. That's critical. We want families engaged in schools, but we want families talking to kids the minute those babies are born. We have a new baby in the Doggett household. My daughter has a new baby, and just to see the amount of what he's learned in 7 months. He's now sitting up, and he has his he prefers certain people and certain things, and certain foods. And there's so many babies born where the parents think, oh, they're just a baby, I don't need to do anything, and they get ignored. So we have a long way to go. We've taken a good step at the state level, we've taken a good step at the city level. We're working on the federal level. We have a long way to go.
Right, I was going to follow up with that. Is this something that makes sense at the local level, the state level, the federal level?
We need everybody. We need all systems.
Got it. Do you agree with that, Representative?
Emily, if I could add, one of the
Sure,
things
absolutely.
that's baked into this SA program is we have competitive grants to allow for child care centers, for example, to apply for these dollars that we have to be able to provide additional training. Because we know that in order for the entirety of the community to reap the benefit, everybody needs to have a higher level of ability to be able to teach these young people. And so we are in the midst of these competitive grants. This will be the first year that we're awarding them. The parent engagement, again, a very, very important part. So it's a multifaceted opportunity that has quality, high quality, full day baked in from the very beginning. And so it's a very innovative model, and one that we think can be replicated and should be replicated. But of course, at the end of the day, we'll know if it works when we measure these young people in the 3rd and 4th grade to see if indeed it has translated through. We are confident that it has. At least our initial numbers have shown very positive, strong results, that these young people coming in have enhanced skills going out. And so we just need to keep pushing that. We've got a fantastic cadre of teachers and administrators that are responsible for the program, and we're very confident that we'll continue to show that throughout the entirety of the program.
And do you think that the business community is on board for the long haul here?
I think we are. Of course, we'll know in 2020. We'll have to re-up the tax in 2020, so there'll be an election. But all indications that I've seen as a member of this board is that we are on our path to really showing improvement, really helping to improve the quality as a whole throughout the system, with the ISDs as partners, with small businesses that are providing child care services as well. So I think over time we'll be able to make a very strong case. These things are never a slam dunk, however, when you go to the voters, and you have to really implement and show that we've made a difference, and I'm very confident that we have, and we will continue to.
Emily, the business community has actually changed the whole conversation. There's a Council for Strong America and Ready Nation at the federal level. There's Raise Your Hand Texas. There's the Chamber, which here, and Charles Butt, who just absolutely put this agenda on the table. Those of us who've been working in the field for a long time thank the business community and know that they were the critical feature that really made us go in a different direction.
Yeah, Emily, and if I can just comment on that, clearly the measurement is going to be vital for it to continue to succeed and to be continuing to be accepted by the business community. I think some of the levels of anxiety that I get whenever we talk about measurement is we're putting out a product, we know how it's measured, and there are a million ways to measure it. And the difference between the measurement of the educational community and the measurement perhaps from the business community and others can be different. And while we may say this is a successful initiative, will the community buy off on it by saying, for example, in the short term, it's very difficult to measure this, but one of the, I remember startling facts that was presented to us during the Brain Power Initiative discussions was a measurement that said the state of Texas, and I didn't do fact checking on this, so I don't know if this is true, but this, I'll certainly repeat it because it was impactful to me. They said that the state of Texas does its prison bed count forecast 10 years out, and it's predicated on third grade literacy rates. So if kids aren't reading by the time they're in the third grade, effectively, if the literacy rates are dropping, they need more beds. And so there is a clear measurement that we all recognize. Problem is we won't know that for a decade. And so if we start putting too many, if you will, pass-fail measurements on this, we'll lose sight of the fact of this is an initiative for 1 year with children in pre-K. We've got to figure out how we're going to, once we get them out of the third grade, reading it at or above grade level, how we reinforce it between the third grade and the sixth grade, which becomes critical. Now you're talking about a lot of other issues like potential dropout, things of that nature, hormonal things that happens to kids around that age. And then you get to the point of getting into high school. How do we get them into college and graduating college or technical schools or vocational schools or whatever path of additional education they're going to need? But all that's going to be predicated on cities and municipalities creating a workforce or a job environment that they're willing to pursue and that we have a workforce. So measurement is going to be incredibly important. My anxiety is that we put some measurements in 2020 when we get ready to redo this deal, if we do it, that there will be measurements that will not have been achieved yet because it takes time. This didn't happen overnight. We can't fix it overnight, but I think, I think we're well on our way.
Right. I think one of the issues if you scale something like this is how do you preserve quality and access. And I think right now, since it's local, there are things like cultural competency, efforts to reach out to bilingual parents, for instance, and how do you scale something like that when you're looking at different communities across the state or the country?
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. And again, we've got a couple of thousand kids in our program. That's a lot of kids if you're the one taking care of them. That's not a whole lot of kids when you talk about the total scope of what's in San Antonio. And then, multiply that from a scale perspective, the rest of the state and certainly the country. So we've got a ways to go. And whether this program would work on a larger scale, I mean, I guess still needs to be accepted. I think people are saying that it can, and all we have to do is take exactly what we have and make it larger and it'll be more effective. Well, it certainly will be effective, but will it be maximized? I guess that remains to be seen. A lot of hard work, and I think we can get there.
Emily, you talked a little bit about cultural competence, and one of the things I think you're doing in San Antonio, we're certainly doing it in Austin and around Texas and around the country, is dual language learning programs. My older granddaughters are fluent in Spanish. They started off in a dual language public school in Austin, and they had to do half the day in Spanish, half in English. When they're in the Spanish portion, the children who speak Spanish fluently are their tutors and help them. When they're in the English portion, they're able to help the other kids. It brings some diversity in, some economic diversity, which we talked about in the earlier panel. I think that's critical. It's something we're not looking at too much. We know we all learn so much from each other. We know that kids learn a lot of language from each other. And so I'd love to see a lot more dual language programs. I also think it's a way to get middle income, upper income families back into public schools and a way to integrate some of those early learning programs where kids can learn a language just like that.
Right. And in a moment, we'll begin to take a few questions. And so while you formulate your questions, I'll toss a final one out here. Do you think that the full day programs are critical? Or is a half day enough?
I think the research is pretty clear that full day is important. It only works though if it's a quality program. Full day of a poor quality program is not that great. Most parents are now working, so if you have a half-day program, what do you do with the other half day? It creates all kinds of problems for parents, and then we don't have as high enrollment in our pre-K programs if they're part day. So I think we need to move to full day, but we need to make sure that that full day is a really great learning environment.
Great. Do we have any questions in the audience? Sure.
Good morning. My name is Kiyomi Colgrove, and I'm assistant professor at Texas State University. I'm really interested in Latino immigrant families and the relationship they have with the schools in the United States. We know that 25% of the children in the schools are actually children of immigrants. So my question to you is, how do you listen to the Latino immigrant families, so immigrant families, and how do you make sure that you meet their needs, not only linguistically, but in a way that they can actually be successful in the United States? Thank you.
You know, I'll answer part from a state perspective. You know, I mean, I think that's more of a global question. How are we meeting the needs of immigrants, Latino population, et cetera, that's coming in? I mean, clearly we have, you know, ESL programs that are in the state of Texas, bilingual programs. You know, those are critical. But you know, if you talk about early education, you know, that's one of the groups that qualifies for pre-K education if they're an ESL learner. And so, you know, we do spend a lot of money on that. You know, remember what I said early on, which is that if we don't pay for it now, we're going to pay for it later. And the economic impact is significant, very significant, especially if, you know, they don't even go to kindergarten. You know, let's say that they just show up in first grade. It's a huge problem. It's a drag on the rest of the kids in that. So we spend a lot of money from a state perspective on that, and then depending on you know where the kids are at, you know, depending on what school district they're in, it could be a very high population of ESL students that are out there, and so you know those are weighted. But as we go into the next legislative session, you know, we've got a little school finance lawsuit that we're going to have to address. And that's going to be one of the issues, you know, because the weights are very old. You know, everything that we've done is you know 20 plus years old. We just keep putting Band-Aids on it. That's going to be one of the issues that we're going to have to address as we move forward. And we recognize that it's going to be critical and it's going to be important. And so we are being very responsible in taking the initiative to make sure that we're doing that. But you know, we can get those kids certainly at a very young level, a very young age rather. Into the programs, into the right programs, and teaching them, learning them, and getting them, you know, learning English. That's going to be the key, and so we are very conscious of that.
We probably have time for 2 more quick questions. Sure. Just wait until you have the microphone.
Sure. Good morning. I'm Laura Vaccaro with Valero Energy, and I have responsibility for funding through the Valero Energy Foundation. So I'm obviously very interested in outcomes. You've all been talking about outcomes and engaging the business community. You talked about what do we need to do between now and 2020. I think this outcomes discussion will be critical. So what specifically are you measuring? What infrastructure do you have in place in terms of the children's achievement as well as the teachers? You've talked a lot about quality. How are you measuring quality of the teachers in the program that you're doing now?
Well, there are obvious measurements that have to happen at the state level because this is an independent school district. These classrooms have to abide by state and federal laws. So we're certainly measuring all of those components. The other, and I can't overstate it, and I don't think in this audience it goes without being recognized, that the biggest measurement that we probably don't have a good tool to measure is the parental participation. You know, there's no standard at the federal or at the state level to say, you know, what a parent has to do to be deemed as a engaged parent. I think that that's going to be, without question, the biggest success component. At the end of the day, when we start looking at this several years down the road, we say because we were able to get parents more engaged and more involved, we were able to teach children and then have it reinforced at home. Not only did we do that, as I mentioned earlier, we were able to generationally make a difference because that child probably has a brother or sister coming up behind them. I just don't know how we're going to be able to measure that and then validate it. We can certainly make the story and make the case and give examples to make everybody feel good, but to be able to quantify that, I think it's going to be difficult. And that's why I said earlier, one of the anxieties that I have is as we start to measure this to say we're going to do it again, that they say, but you didn't hit my mark. And the answer is, I don't know how to hit your mark. What I would ask then is turn it around and say, you need to have, and like Valero does, be a good corporate citizen, get engaged in that campus, and don't have people tell you how good it's doing. Have your own people come in, validate what the process is, and is it working? And oh, by the way, and if it isn't, then make suggestions and get engaged. That's going to be the measure of success that I think is going to be the toughest to validate and to quantify.
Fortunately, we're out of time here, but thank you all very much for joining us.
Sorry
and we'll
about
go
that.
ahead and hand things back to Margaret. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Emily. The packed room this morning is evidence that it takes a village to raise a child. It's most certainly a team sport, as we've been hearing this morning, with parents, teachers, and the community in starring roles. The question is, how does Pre-K for SA create a first-class learning environment, and how can parents help make sure their kids love to learn? To help us answer these questions, please welcome Rebecca Cervantes. She is Executive Director of Avance San Antonio, a nonprofit that helps low-income families with little kids increase their engagement. Next, Jesse Quesada is the parent of a child who is a Pre-K 4SA student, and Ileana Garza has spent more than 22 years in the classroom and is a teacher with Pre-K 4SA. The Atlantic's Ron Brownstein and Emily Dury are both here for this last conversation. Take it away.
So Jesse, we have heard about federal policy, we have heard about state policy, we have heard about educational theory, pedagogical strategies, but of everyone we're talking to, you have seen the program perhaps most up close of all. Your daughter, Gabriella, went through the program and is now in first grade. Talk a little bit about her experience and what your assessment is of the impact it has had on her now that she's beyond it.
Right. Well, we believe that, my wife and I believe that her experience she's benefited from Pre-K from SA a great deal. The foundation that was set there at Pre-K for SA, we've seen the results. We've seen her interaction with kids from when she started with Pre-K to SA to now. She's in first grade, and you know her grades right now. We are proud to say that she is making straight A's.
Oh, that's great. Let me ask you: when the program was formed, when it came to be, what was the conversation like with your wife about whether it would be appropriate for your daughter? What ultimately led you to decide to seek a spot there?
Right. Well, like any other parent, when your child's about to start a school at the beginning, you want to research and find out information. And we looked around. We compared different schools and all. And of course, one of the biggest challenges was the finances. And we realized that Pre-K for SA was better suited for us.
Mm-hmm. And before Emily jumps in, one more question. What was the program like? I mean, what did she spend her days doing?
Well, there was a lot of, like I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of interaction. They were introduced to an iPad where she was able to learn about computers, basic reading, math skills. She would come home and she was always very excited, to go into school, even if she was a little ill. She didn't want to miss. But I really believe working on that iPad there at Pre-K for SA, she came home and now she wanted to take over the computer at home.
I think that's genetic with young kids. Emily.
So we actually have some photos from Pre-K for SA, so if we could go ahead and run those. And Ileana, if you could give us a sense of what a typical day is like for these kids.
Well, the day for the children starts early. They come in and they're greeted. Technology, they go outside, we have outdoor learning, where they go and they don't only run around, but we're playing games. The adults are interacting with them and helping them to grow physically. So we're very conscious-minded of the children, and everything that we do is very intentional for them. We look at each child individually, and we look at their social being. We look at the academic part. We also look at the non-academic part. We look at health-wise as well.
Was that a field trip?
We have a gardener.
You have a gardener.
We have a gardener. So Rico comes out and they garden with us. We just, at my center yesterday, the gardener was there and we were talking about gardening and how do we grow, vegetables, how do we grow plants and those types of things.
Go ahead.
Describe some of the families that you serve. What are these kids' backgrounds?
Well, our population is very diverse. Each center is very unique in its diversity. We service the area, the basic area that's around us. So we have children that are military families. We have children that are tuition-based. We have children that qualify through the federal ways of qualifying. Mm-hmm. So it's a big range.
Am I correct that you were a preschool teacher before this?
Yes.
So where were you teaching before?
I was with Northside ISD.
Is this program different for you as a teacher than what you had been doing, and what are some of the differences?
Oh yes, it's extremely different. Where I was at, in my district, we have a half-day pre-K. And so I was split between two schools. And so the day was very short for the children, and it was, you hit the ground running and you did what you could do for children. And I always, when they left for the day, I always felt if I had a little more time to spend with them. I wish I had more time to build stronger bonds and connections and to allow them to explore more and to discover more. We did very well, but it wasn't enough time. And with Pre-K for SA, you have a full day to build with these children, to make sure that when they leave you, they're very well-rounded and very ready for their next adventure.
So it feels the time is a big difference.
Oh yes, definitely. Yes.
Let me just bring in Rebecca and then turn it back to you, Emily. But so one of the things that in reading about the program, one of the things that's interesting about it is that there's a big focus on engaging parents as well. You work in the community. What is your sense of the verdict on that kind of outreach to parents and the efforts to bring parents, both provide services to the parents, but also to engage them with the schools? How is that being received?
Well, I think for San Antonio, I think our community has always embraced parental engagement. I think those of us that have been in this arena providing support to families have understood that it has to start with parents, and that parents have to be their child's first teacher. And through, I know Avance, that's what we have been doing for the past 43 years here in San Antonio, understanding that education starts with a parent and the home as the first classroom. But again, the other component to parental engagement is providing that support to parents to assume that important role, because I think sometimes we expect parents to become engaged with their children in the educational system, whatever they're doing, and we forget that they may not have the ability or the transportation or the comfort level to do that. So again, it's about providing that support to our parents to ensure that our expectations for parental engagement and school readiness are truly realistic.
Right, and much of the focus has been on enrolling low-income children. Do you see preschool as a way of kind of breaking that cycle of poverty?
Very much so. Avance is a proven fact, and there's so many efforts here in San Antonio that are focusing our early Head Start programs, already our Head Start programs across the city that are doing a phenomenal job. I think that all the research shows that children who are involved from birth in a setting where they are learning, where socially, emotionally they are able to get to the level support that they need to be able to learn are going to be better prepared academically and socially and emotionally. They're able to walk into that kindergarten classroom ready to succeed, ready to be able to be in a formal structure, to be socially at the level that they need to be. So I think San Antonio, we're very lucky that understanding and commitment has been there. I'm going to tell you, it didn't happen overnight. I think that there's always been efforts by the city of San Antonio through their kinder readiness, their family strengthening. United Way has been a big supporter of early childhood education, our business community, the banks. So I think it's been a community-wide effort. I think Pre-K 4SA really raised the level of conversation and the need for making sure that all families in our community are given that opportunity.
Jesse, as a parent, I mean, there's a lot of, as I said, there's a lot of focus on engagement with parents. What was your interaction with the center like? What kind of, when would you find yourself there for what kind of things, how often?
We were very, very surprised that you could actually, walk into the school every morning when we dropped off our daughter. Either there was one teacher or two teachers there. Sometimes when you send your, even now my daughter's in first grade, to get a parent-teacher conference, it's a challenge. So it's almost like we had a mini parent conference every day. Because they were there, you had a question about something, and we could get anything answered as soon as we could. Did I
read there were mandatory field trips? The parents had to participate in field trips, or is that more on paper than in practice?
Oh, it was. They're volunteer, and actually, our daughter's teacher, she actually made it a point to go out of her way on her own time to make her own field trips with parents. She took us to botanical gardens, for example, and that's a good learning experience. And she's teaching, so we found that to be, very good. And we took every opportunity that we could for her to learn more.
One last question on this theme. I saw in the report, the evaluation for year 2 that was done. There was one that was submitted to the city council last fall. There was one statistic that jumped out at me. It said 93% of the parents had participated in at least one activity at the school, at the centers.
At the centers.
Talk about it as a teacher, the level of engagement of parents and how it's compared to other situations you've been in before.
What we try to do is provide opportunities for the parents to come in to the center on a monthly basis, basically. As a teacher, you invite the families to join you on city explorations, and that's what Jesse was talking about. So, and we try to do 2 of those for the school year. But there are numerous opportunities for the parents to come in, not only parent-teacher conferences, which happen twice a year, maybe 3, but we do where we have literacy nights, we have math nights, but we also do things during the day. We have guest readers.
The literacy and math nights, are those aimed at the parents or at the student or the kids?
For both.
For both. Yeah.
So that they both
I'm sorry,
enjoy.
Yes.
Yeah.
You said math literacy nights.
And then we do some fun stuff. We have them come out, and we had like a little mini fiesta one day, last year. And so we do a little bit of everything so that it's not just academic, but, getting the parents to come in and to partner up with us. We're here, we're a team, and together we can make things happen. I can't do it on my own, you can't do it on your own, but together we can.
What are some of the biggest challenges, both in the classroom and maybe the community, in terms of providing quality pre-K?
I think for other providers, that we have in this community is the supply and demand theory. That the demand for the services are here, but the supply of credentialed teachers, is a big issue. I think competitive wages. I think that there is a commitment for the need for starting early, but again, that commitment has to be at the level community-wide that we have for Pre-K 4SA, is that, we need to embrace that if we want excellent teachers like Ileana in the classroom, and we want them to have their credentials and to prepare our children, is that they need to be making a livable wage, and that those wages need to be competitive to ensure quality across the board.
Are there enough qualified teachers?
I think that there is a real need for, I think that the supply of available teachers is an issue. I can tell you for Avance, you know, and Libby Doggett spoke about this, is having a teacher in a classroom with infants and toddlers is very different from having a teacher in a classroom with 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds. So again, the need for infant and toddler credentialed teachers in the city is a big issue. And again, I think as a community, we need to embrace that it has to start also early as infants and toddlers.
Certainly from everything we've read, professional development is a big focus of the program. I read that the second year evaluation said that on average, the master teachers attended 21 professional development events. What are they? What are they working with you on?
We work on our program standards, better understanding them. We work on developmentally appropriate practices. We work on technology. We had a good session on that. But we're offered the professional development courses that the professional development department offers as well, and we go to those on Saturdays as well. But yeah, we're trained a great deal on project approach, things that interests us, things that will make us more qualified and better able to service our children.
And that is open not only to the teachers at the center, but other teachers from the area as well, as I understand it?
Yes, and I did want to say that I think one of the assets from Pre-K4SA for our teachers is their professional development and making quality learning also in their PD more accessible. So we all benefit from that professional development.
Yeah.
So in the last panel, we heard from some of the lawmakers who have been discussing pre-K, but as people who are sort of on the ground day to day, what would you like them to know?
I think I'd like our audience, and I know that many of you are in the same field that we are, is that it hasn't happened overnight. That I think it has been the understanding for the need to start early has been in this community. I think Pre-K4SA, like I mentioned, elevated the conversation and the connection with starting early and starting to prepare our future workforce and ensuring that our children succeed in school and go to college. So I think that as a community, you know, now because of the business community, the support of like General Robles at USAA, you know, Charles Butt, Bartel Zachary, you know, people that have been in this community supporting education now have really been at the forefront saying we need to do this in order to have a better workforce and a better future in the city and a better quality of life. So for us, we embrace that because that's what what we all want is to ensure that our children succeed and our parents succeed. You know, supporting their children in their efforts to to go to school, to go to college, and to be a better prepared workforce.
Jesse, what would you want Emily's question, legislators to know?
Well, if they could find a way to continue to, look into efforts to make it a statewide, maybe if this program could start statewide and it could grow nationwide, it's a very good program. I could tell you this, that if there's a parent that were to come ask me about Pre-K4SA, or they're gonna, they're thinking about putting their child in Pre-K, I would always tell them, look to Pre-K4SA first.
Elena, how about you?
I would really like to see all half-day programs become full-day programs. And that these programs also be truly developmentally appropriate for them to be play-based learning, which we know is the way that children learn best, and not have so much push-down curriculum to our little ones.
Can I ask a kind of a follow-up, start with you and maybe work back the other direction? One of the questions about a 4-year-old pre-K is whether 1 year is enough to make a difference, and whether you really need a 2-year program, getting kids as early as 3. What would you think about that? Is that too young, or would that be, in the same way that you think going from half day to full day would be beneficial, would starting a year earlier also be beneficial?
Well, I've never worked with 3-year-olds, but I'm sure that they could benefit from it. I mean, we see our children make great gains over a year's time, even in the half-day program. But in a full-day program, the gains that they've made have almost doubled. And so as long as it was quality-based, then I'm certain that 3-year-olds would benefit
Jesse, would
from it.
3 have seemed too early to you for Gabriella, or would you have liked that opportunity if it was there?
We would have loved that opportunity because the benefits that we've seen are great. So if there was a pre-K for 3, we would have enrolled her in it.
What do you think?
Well, since we're involved in support services and education starting at birth, I feel that if we're able to provide that opportunity to every child to start at birth, I think is a wonderful thing for this community to be able to do. I can tell you that that continuum of education and support is very important. So yeah, if a child starts at birth and then has a gap, I think prior to kindergarten, those gains are going to be diminished. So again, if we're able as a community to ensure that our children at birth are going to provide that continuum of education and support going into kindergarten so that there's no loss of gains, we're going to be a better community.
Just to be clear, what is the point at which you think it's appropriate for children to enter something that's outside the home predominantly?
I think as early as 6 weeks.
Really?
Oh,
Wow.
yes.
Should we take some
Yeah,
questions from the audience?
take a few questions from the audience. Right over here.
Sure. Erica Prosper with HEB. You guys, thank you very much, first of all, for your stories. It's been a pleasure to hear. You've made references to gains, to benefits you've seen as a parent, as a teacher, and as a community. I would love for you guys to share 3 to 4 very specific examples of those benefits and those gains, you from a teacher's perspective and you from a parent perspective, that you've really seen has evolved as your child's been part of the program, if you don't mind.
Maybe Jesse, you want to start?
Absolutely. We've seen her social skills, we saw her social skills improve. She started doing some math and most important, reading. And now she loves to read. And I believe that's where it started. My wife started reading with her when she was, a toddler, but we saw her reading skills really improve at pre-K for SA, which I believe sets a very good foundation for any child to start their education.
Yeah.
Well, we've seen great gains in children's social and emotional growth. We've seen where they are able to advocate for themselves. We've seen a lot of growth in their way of reasoning and problem solving and communicating with each other and with adults as well. And just, you walk into a classroom and the children greet you and they immediately want you to come and work with them because they see the day as a day of work, because that's what they're doing.
I think as a provider, our partnership with the Harlandale Independent School District is a great example where we start at birth and ensure that we provide that continuum of support for our children. And because of the relationship with Harlandale, then we're able to show that 94% of our children are actually on the A and B honor roll throughout high school. We're also able to show that 95% of our children are passing math and science. So I think that the figures and the testimonials of someone like Jesse is proof enough, and those of us that have been in this arena know that it doesn't only impact our children, it also impacts our parents, because when they value education, they also understand the need for them to get their education. So again, it's a win-win situation, because future generations, the expectation will be that they will go to college or they will get into a training program to get out of poverty and be able to provide a better future for their children.
Yeah, it is interesting. A couple of years ago, we were doing an Next America event with a woman who was the Deputy Commissioner of Education from Maryland, and we were talking about the statistics that today, if your parents were graduating from college, you are 5 times more likely to graduate yourself than if your parents were not. And I asked her if that was daunting. And she gave, I thought, the single most inspiring answer I've ever heard in an event. She said, it's the opposite. She said, I know that every kid that I get in through college, I am affecting not only that child, but generations upon generations. It probably, kids 50, 60 years from now will go to college because of that success in getting the one person across the hurdle today. And I thought that was a very powerful way of looking at what you're describing. Yeah.
And I think I'd like to add, a third of our workforce at Avance are actually Avance parents and children that actually came through our program that now have their college education and are role modeling the value of education to both parents and children.
Yeah. We had another hand up here. I thought, oh yeah, a whole bunch of hands up here. How about up there, and then the gentleman in the second row after.
Yes, I'm Sarah Garland. I'm the executive editor of the Hechinger Report, and I had a question for Ileana. You've talked a little bit about the academics and math and literacy. At the same time, you mentioned play-based, developmentally appropriate curriculum. So I'm wondering if you could talk about and describe for the audience the math lesson you taught yesterday and how you deal with the push down of standards and getting kids ready for academics, but also recognizing that they're 4. And how do you teach them math? What does that look like?
So when we plan a lesson, we're very intuitive as to what the children are doing in the classroom. So our lessons are planned around interest-based. So, and also when we're planning, we look at children, we look at every child in the group. And so we'll plan for children that are on the emergent level. What are they doing? What does that sound like? We plan for children that are on target. What are they doing? What does that sound like? And for the children that are advanced, what are they doing? What does that sound like? How are we going to take them up to the next level? So when we introduce a lesson, we'll just kind of get them to join in and let them explore the materials a little bit. And then we'll start like, well, I thought maybe today we could pattern to, I have some bears here, and these bears are trying to cross the river, but they just don't know how. So look, I have these squares. Let's see, red, blue, and so then they'll tell you, oh, another red one, another blue one, another red one. And then so you release the materials and the children explore. And what the teacher does at this point, because we're working in small group, is that we stand up and we go around to each individual child and we scaffold the learning wherever they are at.
Let's have a final question. No pressure, but you're summing up the whole day.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. And my question is for Mr. Quesada. We've had 2 panels up here, and they've talked about parental engagement. And so can you please talk briefly about how the school engages you, and then also what do you feel as a parent that schools need to do so we could engage you better? I'm Gregorio Velasquez, and I'm the principal at Tynan Early Childhood Education Center for SAISD.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, the parent engagement was really, really good. We received a folder every day. There was a take-home folder. We knew exactly what was going on. And like I mentioned earlier, when we walked in, it was like a mini conference. We could ask questions. We had 2 parent-teacher conferences, which gave us updates. In addition, the school provided some training for parents so they could, have a takeaway to go home and maybe perhaps emphasize more what goes, how to interact with their students, with the children, how they, what they're learning, so there could be a better communication. And any time that we had a question, we could, call the teacher, if to set up a conference. I believe we did that one time, and it was very, very easy to do. So the interaction there at Pre-K for SA is excellent.
Rebecca, I'm slightly exempting you from this, but Jesse, Ileana, I know it's not easy to come in front of a room of strangers and talk about yourself, but you guys have really helped us with a terrific perspective, and your perspective was very, very helpful as well. So join me in thanking this terrific panel. And I think Margaret has some final words.
I'm sorry?
And Margaret's going to have some final words.
Ending the day with all those testimonials and with bears and squares, which is what will stick with my ribs for the rest of the day. That is it for the day. It is clearly not it for the conversation as this city and the country grapple with how to ensure that the youngest residents and often the most vulnerable have the best start possible. As Ron says, and I like to repeat, it's a very powerful statement. He said, Texas is America on fast forward. So it has been a special privilege to be in your city, San Antonio, to hear your story. I hope we get a chance to come back again. Thank you. You've been an incredible audience, and we really appreciate you giving us all your time this morning. And thank you especially to the Heising Simons Foundation
Yes.
for making this morning possible. Before you go, I have one final request. It's your class assignment. As you walked in, we gave you a survey to fill out, and you'll get an email from me, which essentially asks you what you thought of today. And it will just take a few minutes, I promise. It won't be graded, but it helps us enormously if you fill it out and tell us about your experience. It informs how we produce these summits and what we will do next time. Have a wonderful day. Thank you all so much.
You're welcome. So nice meeting you. Thank you. That was terrific. That's exactly.
Thank you.